Hi, I'm home. Just saying such a simple greeting made my voice tremble a bit. For nearly 7 years, ever since my daughter Ella was in high school, my family has ignored me. Ella glanced down, avoiding my eyes. When she noticed the bill in my hand, a slight smirk appeared on her face. Earlier, I found the wedding bill lying at the front door and picked it up. Is this their way of telling me I'm supposed to pay it? Dad, don't be all embarrassing and cry at the wedding. Okay, I might cry. I was the one who changed your diapers. You know, just yesterday, you were a baby. And now you're getting married. It's wonderful, but marriage feels complicated. Most parents would cry, right? But here I am, unable to shed a single tear. Am I not a normal mom? Maybe. It's time, I murmured to myself. But of course, no one turned to look at me. It's time to let go of Ella's hand. My name is Amelia, a woman in her 50s, and a housewife. I've been married for 25 years, and soon, Ella will be married too. How should a mom feel at a time like this? Purely happy. Or is it normal to feel the sadness of letting go? I didn't feel either. I met my husband Emmanuel at a restaurant. The restaurant was close to my office, so I stopped by often. Over time, I got to know him, who worked there, and eventually, he gave me his contact information, and we began dating. Back then, he was the manager of the restaurant, working tirelessly from morning to night. Despite his busy schedule, he called me almost every day. Had a tough customer today, but hearing your voice makes it better, Amelia. Listening to his complaints became part of my daily routine. He was incredibly dedicated to his job and full of a strong sense of responsibility. He wouldn't just leave the store to the part-timers. He was the kind who took charge himself. I did feel a bit lonely that he was always working and hardly had time for dates, but I was drawn to this serious side of him. After a year of dating, we got married. I thought to myself, from now on, I'd be the one closest to him, supporting him as best as I could. I'd keep the place clean and prepare healthy meals for him. Maybe it was a bit old-fashioned, but I realized I was the type who wanted to give my all to someone I loved. But just a few months after we got married, right after I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. Oh, by the way, I quit my job. What? One morning, I asked Emmanuel, who was watching TV in his pajamas, "Do you have the day off?" His response was unexpected. "What? Did you say you quit?" "Wait, why?" Seeing my distress, Emmanuel shrugged with a slight smirk. I had no choice. It was just too hard for me. His voice was low, but there was a hint of bitterness. Sure, his job was tough, and he probably had been holding it in. But right now, I'm pregnant. Anxiety about our future began flooding my mind. Quitting his job without discussing it first. What are we supposed to do now, especially with a baby on the way? These words were stuck in my throat. Yet, seeing Emmanuel claim he was struggling, I hesitated to voice my own feelings. It felt like holding back nausea, the weight of it pressing in my chest. I thought maybe I should say something comforting, but I knew if I spoke too quickly, it might come out harsh. "What's with that look? You don't seem happy I quit." Even though I tried to keep my face neutral, my expression must have betrayed my thoughts. Fine. You want me to work? I could probably ask them to undo my resignation. I get it, I have no worth if I'm not bringing in money. Right, fine, I'll work. Maybe tomorrow I'll just hang myself. But hey, it's fine since you said to work. That's not. Emmanuel waited for my response. Don't push yourself too hard. How could I tell him to work in a situation like this? Your health is most important, after all. I forced out the words, my voice barely steady. Emmanuel looked satisfied, lifting his chin with a nod. He was a serious, responsible person, so he'd worn himself down being overly cautious and considerate of others. After a bit of rest, I thought, he'll go back to work for our family. Luckily, I also worked full-time and planned to take leave after the baby was born. Until then, I could support us. However, even as my belly grew larger, and after I gave birth and held our sweet Ella, Emmanuel still didn't return to work. Why don't you just go back to work? Shortly after Ella was born, Emmanuel suggested something unexpected. Your gloomy face is annoying to have around the house. You don't seem suited to child care. Anyway, how about I take care of Ella, and you go earn a living? Who would be taking care of our child? At this point, he had never changed a diaper or given Ellie a bottle. He hadn't even held her properly. Well, you always seem irritated, so I was scared to get near Ella. If you weren't here, I'd manage just fine. With his push to get back to work, and with financial worries looming, I reluctantly agreed. So, less than 3 months after giving birth, I returned to my job. To my surprise, Emmanuel took on Ella's care. But when I'd come home and try to lift Ella for comfort, Emmanuel would snatch her away. He'd then hold her close, nuzzling her as if to show me he was the one she wanted. By the time Ella started walking, she had grown incredibly attached to him. It was only natural she'd cling to the person who spent the most time with her. Let's go to the park together, I suggested on a weekend. But Emmanuel frowned. What? If you've got time to play, why not clean? There's dust piling up in the corners. Guess that's what happens when you don't handle child care. You don't even notice the filth. Can't you imagine how sad it is for a kid to eat dust? True, the house was a bit cluttered. He only handled child care, leaving the housework to me, it seemed. Once, I'd tried discussing dividing the chores, but Emmanuel flew into a rage. So you're going to dump both the kid and housework on me? How nice for you. Think you're above me just because you're earning. That kind of stubborn pride was only acceptable in our parents' generation. Haven't you realized that era's over? And by the way, you barely make enough to act so high and mighty. Whenever something displeased him, he would unleash a torrent of words, leaving me no space to respond. Before I knew it, our roles had solidified. He took on child care, while I handled work and house chores. Ella, once a cheerful toddler, started taking on Emmanuel's exact mannerisms as she grew older. Ella, don't leave your bag and socks by the door. Now in elementary school, Ella would drop her socks at the door, leave her jacket in the hallway, and grab snacks from the kitchen, leaving the cupboard open. She'd trail chips from the kitchen to the living room, with crumbs following her path. In many ways, she was as careless as Emmanuel. The one doing the laundry can pick up the socks, Ella replied, her eyes never leaving her game. Yelling wouldn't help, so I let out a sigh. It's 7 p.m. when I get home from work. Ella, I see your bag by the door, which means you haven't done your homework, right? I'm going to start dinner now, so why not work on it while I cook? It'll take me about 30 minutes. Let's see who finishes first, you or me. As I put on my apron, I tried to encourage Ella. I had actually received a message from her teacher saying she hadn't been completing her assignments. I knew she'd push back if I scolded her outright, so I tried to take a gentler approach. Seriously, it's gonna take you 30 minutes to make dinner. I'm starving. That's ridiculous. She widened her eyes and threw her gaming device across the room. Emmanuel, who had been napping nearby, woke up at the sound of her outburst. Come on, dinner's taking that long. You really are useless. Dad, I'm gonna pass out from hunger here. She never makes what I ask for. and she's always nagging me to eat veggies. She's totally out to get me. This is child abuse." Ella ran into Emmanuel's arms, pretending to cry and painting me as the villain. It was nothing new. Her eyes were dry, obviously fake tears. Even though Emmanuel had to know this, he always took her side. "You know you're just mean. Don't you care about your own kid?" "Of course I care," I answered immediately. "I care, that's why I worry and try to guide her. Last time, she even took my game away from me. Who takes a kid's toy? That's just cruel." That time, she'd been absorbed in the game for 3 hours straight, refused her sandwich at lunch, and demanded candy instead. If I skip a test or gym class, she finds out and freaks out. She's totally spying on me. It's creepy. Ella isn't your property. Respect her feelings. Emmanuel supposedly took care of Ella, but I handled the school communication, PTA meetings, and all other outside matters. "That's your job," he'd said, pushing it all onto me. Whenever something happened at school, the calls came to me. But if I disciplined Ella, she'd cry abuse. Even just trying to ask her questions would quickly escalate to her speaking as if it was a fight. It was getting out of control. Spoiled by Emmanuel, Ella's behavior was reckless, and I couldn't help but worry about her future. I kept hoping that maybe someday she'd remember all the things I tried to tell her and understand. The turning point came when Ella reached high school. Once she started noticing boys, she became capable of acting quite ladylike. Ella is very charming and popular with the boys. The girls trust her, and she's even been nominated for class president. Everyone loves her. Her high school teacher praised her. I was surprised. I felt relieved, reassured that all the times I'd nagged her hadn't been in vain. It made me truly happy, but her attitude at home only got worse. As if she saw me as garbage. Ella's gaze turned icily indifferent. So annoying. Every morning, instead of saying good morning, she'd click her tongue when she walked into the living room. When I set breakfast on the table, she'd respond with a heavy sigh. "Eller, have a great day." "What? Get off my sight." Despite the hurtful words, I continued to see her off at the door. I found myself missing those days when she would at least talk back with attitude. "Looks like it's going to rain heavily this evening, so take care." Shut up. If I gave up on her now, I felt our mother-daughter relationship would truly collapse. Just as her behavior outside the home had changed, I held on to hope that she'd one day treat me normally, too. "Aren't you ever going to let go of her? How long are you planning to hover around Ella?" As I stood by the door seeing her off, Emmanuel came around, just waking up. His hair was a mess, and he let out a yawn. "She's clearly annoyed by you." Of course, I knew she found it annoying, but I still sent her off every morning. I understood that too much hovering would be a mistake, but at the very least, I wanted to be there to see her off. To Emmanuel and Ella, it probably looked like I was taking my time, but every morning I'd rush to the station, barely making it on time. "Hey, Dad. Good morning." "Morning, Dad. I'm going out with my friends on Sunday. Can you drive me to the station?" "Sure." Watching her easily chat with Emmanuel made my heart tighten. Sensing my conflicted feelings, he shot me a sly smile. "Poor mom, huh? Want me to tell you how to make Ella like you?" "Wait, really?" For a second, I was hopeful. "Just work harder and earn more. Ella understands the value of money. If you're the breadwinner, she'll respect you. Maybe throw in a bigger allowance, and she'll love you for it." I suppose that would be an easy way to gain her favor. "Oh yeah, I'd totally respect you then. But stop acting like it's a big deal when you tell me to save." So annoying. The best thing is to just hand over the cash without saying anything. It's so annoying when you go on about high schoolers don't need luxury bags or something. Just so out of touch. I wasn't even nagging her that much, but I couldn't let everything slide and spoil her completely. I have to teach her what's right and what's wrong. I'm her parent, after all. Ella clicked her tongue and exchanged a look with Emmanuel. I hadn't meant to say anything unusual, yet suddenly I found myself biting my lip, feeling unsure. After that, things changed. They both began ignoring me completely. No matter how much I spoke to them, they wouldn't respond. I tried acting as if I didn't care, continued speaking to them, even got a bit angry at times, hoping to get a reaction from Ella. Shamefully, there were times when I was close to tears. But still, silence. Total, absolute silence. It felt as if I'd become invisible in my own home. Teenagers have their rebellious phase. I just needed to hold on a little longer. When Ella moved out for college, I thought perhaps the distance might do us some good. This year, Ella started working. I hoped that seeing me work might change her perspective on me. With that faint hope, I continued caring for her from afar. It's been 7 years. 7 years of being ignored. Apparently, outside of home, she was a perfectly friendly person. And the year she started her job, she announced her engagement. A wedding invitation. One day, I found an invitation conspicuously left by the front door. Since the bride's name was Ella, I could only assume she was getting married. You're getting married? Congratulations. Ella. Even when she occasionally came home to relax, she still seemed oblivious to my presence. About the wedding, it was as though my existence had faded away so naturally that it felt almost intentional. Dad, I chose the top menu option for the wedding dinner. Oh, nice. Open bar, right, of course. I realized then that the wedding was indeed happening, yet I felt unsure whether to feel happy for her, given the situation. Since they were planning a wedding, I figured I'd have some role to play. And surely, she'd introduce her fiancé to me. But as the date approached, not only had I not met him, but I hadn't even had a single conversation with Ella. Finally, I started to accept that I had expected too much from her. One day, I came home to find Ella's shoes haphazardly tossed in the entryway. Maybe because the wedding was coming up. She'd been visiting more frequently. Our house wasn't big, so I could hear her and Emmanuel's cheerful voices from the living room. I'm home. I raised my voice slightly. The lively chatter between the two of them cut off abruptly. They had to have heard me, yet still ignored me. As I stepped into the entryway, I noticed a piece of paper on the floor. Oh, the wedding invoice. It seemed unlikely that both the invitation and this bill had just accidentally fallen in the entryway. I picked it up, dragging my heavy feet toward the living room. I'm home. My voice trembled a bit. Ella looked down, avoiding my gaze. Once she saw that I was indeed holding the invoice, a slight smirk appeared on her face. Dad, don't be embarrassing and cry at the wedding. Okay. I might, though. My precious Ella, the one I raised with so much love, getting married. I tear up just thinking about it. Dad, don't get ahead of yourself. Ella had always been close to Emmanuel, even as she grew up. Now she leaned against him, laughing and joking around. Hey, I'm the one who changed your diapers, Ella. It feels like just yesterday you were a baby. And now you're getting married. I'm happy, but marriage feels complicated. Most parents would cry, you know. I couldn't shed a tear. So maybe I wasn't a normal mom. Looking back, maybe I'd never been normal. Emmanuel was supposed to handle parenting, but he'd left the hard parts to me. He just spoiled her. Naturally, I ended up as the bad guy. Even so, she was my precious child. If I had to play the villain, I'd still worry about her future. Ella. For the first time in years, my eyes met Ella's. As I looked directly at her face, I saw deep lines between her brows unusual for someone in her early 20s. She looked spiteful, hardened. My sweet child. I couldn't even think that phrase anymore. Honestly, she frightened me. It felt like a spell had broken. I finally realized just how overly protective I'd been. Maybe it's time to let go, I murmured to myself. But of course, no one even looked my way. It was time to let go of Ella. He received the wedding invitation only a month prior. The wedding day arrived in what felt like no time at all. Starting an hour before the ceremony, my phone began ringing non-stop. The calls were from Emmanuel and Ella. They kept calling over and over. Soon, a message from Ella popped up. "Why aren't you coming to the wedding? This is so weird." Even through the text, I could sense her anger and desperation. "Get here now. Are you trying to ruin my wedding? You've got to be kidding me." Words entirely out of place for a wedding invitation. "Why won't you pick up? Hey, Mom." The tone of panic intensified. Seeing Mom written out, I was surprised Ella still thought of me as her mom. When was the last time she'd called me Mom? In my mind, I could hear the word mom in a young child's voice. I couldn't even remember if that voice was really Ella's. I had waited for the day Ella would call me Mom again. But now it was too late. Far too late. This is getting annoying. Let's turn this off. Carefully avoiding her calls, I powered down my phone. Now I was in a hotel room nearby. If I'd stayed home, they might have dragged me to the wedding. So I'd chosen to hide away. Lying on the soft, clean bed, I tossed the now silent phone aside. Hours later, when I turned it back on, I saw missed calls from during the ceremony. It seemed the wedding hadn't gone as planned. Since I had a meeting with someone later that evening, I headed down to the hotel lobby. Scanning the spacious lobby, I spotted a man with a somber expression seated on a couch in the corner. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Alex." When I called out to the man, he stood up. The polite young man was Alex. In his late 20s, he looked like a well-mannered, respectable young man. He was Ella's fiancé. "I apologize for all the trouble." "No, it's no trouble at all. The wedding was called off last minute. I owe you for helping me out." Just as I was about to sit down on the sofa across from Alex, the quiet lobby was filled with the sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the space. Why? A loud shout followed. Turning around, I saw Ella storming toward us, nostrils flaring, and her teeth bared. Behind her was Emmanuel, his face full of rage. After not finding me at home and unable to reach me, they must have turned their attention to Alex. It seemed they suspected Alex, noticing his unusual behavior, and had secretly followed him, thinking he might be hiding something. "Hey, I knew something was off." He kept insisting we couldn't start the wedding without Mom. "So you brats planned to sabotage us from the start, didn't you?" She spit out her words in an angry tirade. I'd always known she had a sharp tongue, but this time, her harshness carried an edge that was truly unsettling. For a moment, I felt myself shudder. Next to me, Alex looked completely taken aback, on the verge of tears. For someone who has lived a straightforward life, they'd never have experienced being yelled at like this. It's only natural he wouldn't be used to it. "Ella." Alex's quiet, strained voice seemed to snap Ella back to herself. Her previously hardened eyes softened, and she shifted from a wide stance to a more delicate posture. "Oh no," I just got startled. It was too late for her to try and cover it up. As Ella blinked and moved closer, Alex instinctively stepped back. his face pale. Ella seemed to realize she couldn't disguise herself any longer. Rather than keeping up appearances, she was clearly stewing, wanting to question me. The sweetness drained from her carefully crafted expression, revealing a more natural, unfiltered look. So what's going on here? You knew each other. Instead of responding, I gazed up at the hotel's chandelier. Its beauty seemed surreal, and I found myself captivated by it. Hey, are you listening? Did you actually plan all this with Alex? My wedding got cancelled, you know. A rich aroma of coffee drifted through the air. The thought of coffee was inviting, so I turned to Alex. Hey Alex, would you like to get a coffee in the lounge over there? What? Before Alex could respond, Ella's sharp voice cut through. You, Mom, I'm talking to you. What coffee? Stop ignoring me. Ella's face twisted in frustration. Even saying Mom seemed to irritate her. Unable to hold back, she grabbed my shoulders and started shaking me. My head bobbed from side to side, but I paid it no mind, pressing my finger thoughtfully to my lips. Perhaps I'll have some cheesecake with that coffee, I mused. Mom. Ella continued to use the word mom, twisting and turning in frustration. Stop ignoring me. Why are you ignoring me? Say something, anything. Pressed by Ella's intensity, even Emmanuel began to jump in. Do you really think you can just ruin Ella's wedding and walk away? Start by apologizing to her. Go on, stop standing there silently. All I wanted was a cup of coffee. That was all that was on my mind. Apparently, there was some commotion happening in the peaceful lobby, but it hardly mattered to me. Hey, are you listening? Mom, how long are you going to ignore me? Ella's eyes began to fill with tears, and the grip on my shoulders weakened. I let out a small yawn, a little bored. Mom, what's wrong with you? It was Alex who finally broke the silence. Enough, Ella. I've heard everything from her. She told me you and your father have been ignoring her for years. That's... Ella faltered. Your mother worked all the time, wasn't interested in you, so you say. And whenever you saw her, you claimed she was only criticizing you. You were mistreated, right? Exactly. She even refused to come to my wedding. She's awful. Ella fiddled anxiously with her fingers. She wasn't invited, so it's only natural she didn't attend. What? Alex turned to me with a gentle expression. You weren't invited to the wedding, were you? No, I wasn't. I knew Ella was getting married, of course. She has never been good about tidying up and leaves things lying around. The wedding invitation was thrown at the front door, so I simply picked it up and looked at it. I had only picked up some discarded trash. I hadn't been invited, so they had no right to yell at me for not showing up. Apologies, but after seeing the personal details on that piece of trash, I'd reached out to Alex, and that's how we ended up here. Alex, you mentioned the wedding was canceled. Does that mean the engagement is off as well? Yes, that's correct. Good. If you married a woman who treats the house like a garbage can, you'd have a hard time. Ella was so overwhelmed with anger and shock that she made a strangled sound, unable to form words. After taking a few deep breaths, she managed to lash out at me. So you really spread lies about me and ruined my wedding. You're the worst, the lowest. You call yourself a mom, destroying your kid's happiness. See, I told everyone she was an abusive mom. You just want to make your own kid miserable. Anyone listening might think I was a terrible mom too, if they only heard Ella's side of things. But Alex had already figured out which side was telling the truth. Ella, your misery is your own doing. She showed me videos of how you acted at home. No matter how many times she tried to speak to you, You completely ignored her. Who's really the lowest here? It's you, Ella. What? Since Ella didn't show her true self around others, I'd thought it best to reveal her behavior beforehand. Marrying someone while hiding her real nature would be nothing short of fraud. Though it was right before the wedding, I had to step in to protect Alex. This is awful. Awful. It's about you, right? Alex's gaze was icy. The terrible treatment you claim your mother put you through, that was all a lie, wasn't it? No, it wasn't a lie. She's so annoying. Always telling me to pick up my socks, not to drop chips on the sofa, to do my homework, to stop playing games, oh, and to eat my vegetables. Even though she could have exaggerated her complaints, Ella only recited the facts. It was clear she found these basic reminders extremely annoying, but the abuse she'd claimed was really just common sense, leaving Alex unimpressed. So, because you found it annoying, you decided to ignore her and shut her out of the family. Sounds like your mother is just a regular mom to me. When someone cares about you, they'll be on your case. If they didn't care, they'd let you be. Emmanuel laughed dismissively. That's just her taking out her work stress on Ella, isn't it? I raised Ella with real love, so she never rebelled against me. If Amelia's hated, there's a reason for it. She just failed at parenting. Feeling proud of Ella's affection, he puffed up, looking down on me. But Alex continued calmly. Anyone can be liked if they spoil someone enough. If you genuinely care about someone, you take on the role of disciplinarian, even if it means they don't like you. It's only natural for people to drift toward what's easiest. It made sense that she would feel closer to Emmanuel. No matter how much I tried to guide her, it meant nothing if Emmanuel allowed her to ignore my efforts. In the end, it seemed my approach to parenting was considered a failure. Ella, let's call off the wedding. We haven't officially married yet anyway. No, I can't. Please, no. Ella clung to Alex in desperation, wrapping her arms around his waist like a petulant child. Look, my mom has nothing to do with our marriage. She was always picking on me, so I just ignored her. She'd act like she was doing me a favor whenever she gave me money, and always said things that bothered me. That's all it was. I'll be fine with you, Alex. No, it'll end up the same way. Alex lowered his gaze slightly. He'd fallen in love with Ella enough to want to marry her, but it was as though he'd discovered she was a completely different person. This would be a difficult reality to accept. Today, I overheard some people from your workplace talking at the wedding. They said you quit your job. Is that true, Ella? Ella fumbled for words, practically confirming the truth. Apparently, you told them it's awful to have to work, and then you just quit. Was this marriage supposed to be your forever job? Well, it's just that. It seemed Ella had intended to shift her dependency from me to Alex. Living off your partner's income, that was your plan. Just like Emmanuel. Right? No, that's not. Alex shot Ellie a glare. You quit your job before we even married, without discussing it. There's no excuse for that. Ella clenched her teeth. She looked like she wanted to yell, but was just barely holding herself back. She didn't want to lose him. Well, to be precise, she didn't want to lose the role he would play as a financial provider. I swallowed my pride and spoke to your colleagues. They told me a lot about you, Ella. They said you bragged about your plan. Marry a simple, kind man who's willing to support you financially, then start looking for a higher-earning partner at your leisure. They said you boasted about upgrading husbands over time. Alex murmured bitterly. So you meant I'm the fool whose only worth is being kind and dependable. Though it was an odd setting, even at the wedding. Most people wouldn't openly say things to lower the bride's reputation. But clearly, her colleagues had pent-up frustration. They shared plenty of unsolicited stories. You ignored male colleagues because they didn't earn enough. But I hear you fawned over your handsome boss. Even after our engagement, you kept going to parties to find someone else. Apparently, you've been bragging about having 3 boyfriends while being engaged. Did you think people were impressed? Everyone seemed repulsed, but you couldn't tell, could you? And while you've put all this effort into finding men, you planned on quitting soon, so you didn't care about learning your job. Ella's face turned bright red. Had she really not realized she was disliked? She seemed to crumble, her face twisted in despair as she crouched down, visibly shaken. Her reaction suggested she truly thought she was popular. How oblivious could she be to others' feelings? How utterly self-centered. Sorry, but I'm not foolish enough to go through with this marriage knowing I was being used. It's off. I've already received multiple photos from your colleagues proving your affairs, so I'll be requesting a settlement. Since you ruined our wedding, you'll also cover the cost of the ceremony. Agreed. Ella let out a desperate, wailing cry. Even Ella could see that pleading and making excuses were pointless now. All she could do was cry and scream. A man who can't silently support his wife financially isn't someone I want near my daughter. Emmanuel finally spoke up after a long silence. After staying silent for a while, Emmanuel finally spoke up. His voice lacked authority and was somewhat restrained. He knew well enough who was truly at fault here, but he was just putting on a brave front. Though he had always acted domineering at home, he was not a strong man. Looking back, it now seemed that during his restaurant manager days, he had worked excessively simply because he couldn't manage the part-time staff properly. In the end, it felt like he was the one paying the price. A settlement? Fine, I'll pay. But settlements for married couples' affairs usually go for around $10,000, right, for an affair before marriage. It's probably closer to $200 pocket change, really. Begging, are we? Emmanuel scoffed, sneering at Alex. And don't worry about the wedding expenses. Amelia here will take care of those. Only in times like these did he lean on me. He came close and even patted me on the back. Without saying a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Raising my hand to face level, I let the paper fall from my fingers. Divorce certificate. Picking it up from the floor, Emmanuel tilted his head in confusion. Then his face grew pale as he started to realize. Wait, a divorce certificate? How? Why? Why? Because, of course, I had divorced Emmanuel. There was no need to explain, so I stayed silent. What? It seemed he realized quickly. You actually submitted those divorce papers. I'd actually tried to file for divorce when Ella was around 5. Emmanuel hadn't worked and wasted money. Young Ella, meanwhile, adored Emmanuel for spoiling her and had started resenting me. I'd known I couldn't go on like that, so I tried to leave him, but he refused to let Ella go. Fine, I'll sign the divorce papers. Go ahead, leave if you want. But Ella is mine, and I won't let you see her again. I'm mentally unwell and can't work, so who knows if I can even care for her. I might just take her with me to the afterlife. If it comes to that. He'd handed me the divorce papers with that terrifying threat. I didn't care what happened to him, but with Ella as his hostage, I couldn't go through with it. That was almost 20 years ago. Now I'd long since lost any fondness for Ella, and could finally submit the papers without hesitation. This can't be. You can't just suddenly divorce me. Is it the money? Of course. I only started my hair restoration treatments last month. How am I supposed to pay for next month's session? Realizing he'd said too much, He clamped his hand over his mouth. The way he openly worried about money was astounding. You've had an easy life, and now at your age, you're getting left behind. That's rough. Alex turned a pitying gaze on him. Hair restoration is a luxury you can't afford anymore. Since Ella's going to need help covering her settlement and wedding costs, you'll just have to work. Emmanuel buried his head in his hands. Alex, come on, let's go grab that coffee. I'm feeling refreshed after a bit of good news. So it's my treat. What a coincidence. I'm feeling pretty great myself after cutting ties with some bad influences. Ignoring the despair on Ella and Emmanuel's faces, we exchanged a smile. It was as if we were in a completely different world, leaving them behind without a second glance. Mom, Amelia. But right now, a delicious coffee was waiting for me. Without looking at the two, who seemed to have crumpled to the ground, Alex and I left. An hour later, as we finished coffee and cake, Ella and Emmanuel were waiting again. Just seeing them was irritating. I was already dreading whatever fresh tantrum they might throw. With Emmanuel now a stranger due to our divorce, and no need to see Ella ever again, I felt free of their drama. This time, however, their demeanor was different. They looked completely defeated, shoulders slumped, and mouths hanging open. They didn't even have the strength for a confrontation. Why? In her hands, she clutched several wedding gifts. Some had been opened hastily, with torn wrapping paper. I have so many friends, and they all came to the wedding. My coworkers, too. Why? The gift stumbled from her hands onto the floor. Not a single one of them had money in it. Ella, abandoned by both Alex and me, had always been stubborn by nature. Perhaps she thought she could cover the settlement and wedding expenses with the wedding gifts and prove us wrong. But there was nothing of value in the gifts she had counted on. After hearing what Alex shared about her reputation at work, it was clear Ella wasn't well liked. She had flirted only with handsome, wealthy men while ignoring others, treating herself as special, and looking down on other women as though they were beneath her. With that attitude, it's no surprise there weren't any real friends willing to pay to attend her wedding. If anyone came, it was probably out of curiosity about what kind of man she'd fooled, or simply to enjoy the meal. Why, my friends? The men who'd been close to her were likely only interested in her for superficial reasons. The women had probably just held back from saying what they really thought. Looking back, her nomination as class representative in high school might have just been a way to offload responsibilities. The same women she'd looked down upon likely despised her. The popular Ella, once surrounded by admirers and friends, had finally fallen apart. Her fiancé, her money, her job, her friends, even her pride, she'd lost them all. Mom. Ella clung to my waist, tears streaming down her face. Moms are supposed to be the ones who comfort and accept their children, even when they mess up. But even moms are only human. When you're hurt for years, eventually, something inside breaks. Mom. Ignoring someone doesn't hurt physically. It doesn't leave a visible wound, but it cuts deep into the heart. Let her learn firsthand the cruelty of what she'd inflicted on others. I gently brushed Ella's hand away, and she collapsed to the floor effortlessly, too drained to even try getting up. Alex, I apologize deeply for the trouble my daughter has caused. There's no need. In fact, I'm genuinely grateful to you for saving me from this marriage. Well then, I'll head back to my hotel room. And your home? Oh, it's a rental, so I've already arranged to move out. I couldn't bear to keep living in a place filled with bad memories. My belongings are still there, but movers will clear everything out tomorrow. I see. Alex nodded in understanding. Nearby, Emmanuel stammered. Wait, So where are Ella and I supposed to go? Ella was an adult now, with 2 grown-ups. I had no reason to worry about where they'd live. All right then, I'll be on my way. Good night, good night. With a calm wave, Alex and I parted ways. Ella and Emmanuel stood frozen, unable to follow us or even call out. People who'd only ever thought of leeching off others would now have to fend for themselves. Where they ended up was no longer my concern. Afterward, I moved into a cozy little apartment on my own. The day after the wedding, I changed my phone number and address, leaving Ella and Emmanuel without any way to reach me. Finally, I was free of them. Each day, I went to work and came home to handle my chores, much the same as I'd done before the divorce. But there was one difference. Hello, I'm home. But there's one thing that's different now. Now I have a peaceful welcome waiting for me. Hello, I'm home. Hello, I'm home. Hello, I'm home. Yes, I'm home, Sunny. I'd started keeping a pet parakeet named Sunny. It was adorable how Sunny responded with "Hello, I'm home," right back at me. Hello, I'm home. Hello, I'm home. Welcome back. Living with Sunny was far more fulfilling and joyful than staying with people who wouldn't talk. Lately, even my coworkers had started saying, "You seem so much brighter." My second life had finally begun, and a curtain was rising on a new chapter.
My daughter-in-law is not family, so she's in the way. With those words echoing, the car drove off, leaving me behind. Lost in unfamiliar mountains, on unknown terrain. I felt utterly bewildered. And Mason's funeral is about to start. A few days earlier, upon hearing the grave news about Mason, my husband and I rushed to his family's home. Everyone had been prepared for Mason's passing since he had been in the hospital for some time. Rather than a sense of sorrow, it felt more like relief that Mason was finally free from pain. However, the funeral preparations were quite a challenge. My husband's family home, situated in the mountains, is the main branch of the family. They used to own vast lands in the past. Although the family's fortune was squandered by the grandfather's generation, their pride as the main family remained. During occasions like Christmas or family gatherings, many relatives would come, and I was always roped in to help. Given that Mason was the head of such a family, his funeral had to be grand. Sue, my mother-in-law, Wyatt, my husband, and Grace, his sister, were all in a frenzy. Our family is the main branch. The funeral has to be grander than for Mason's younger brother. Right, we're expecting about 100 attendees. Maybe I should get a new pearl necklace for the occasion. While everyone voiced their own opinions, I, the daughter-in-law, was left to handle all the preparations. Austin, ensure you discuss everything properly with the funeral home. You know it best. Please make sure to choose the best altar and coffin. The catering after the viewing should be from that fancy restaurant. Their steak is delicious. Truth be told, due to family circumstances, I had worked at a funeral home before getting married. This seemed to be another reason the in-laws looked down upon me. I certainly know the ins and outs of funeral preparations, so I don't mind handling them. But it's frustrating that they push all the planning and communication with the relatives onto me, yet never miss an opportunity to voice their opinions. It's the worst. Upgrading the altar will cost an additional $1,200, and the coffin is $400 more. Is that okay? It's the daughter-in-law's duty to manage such things. Typically, the deceased's favorite dishes are served during the viewing. If the dishes look cheap, it'll be embarrassing. Just do as you're told. With the gifts from all the attendees, we'll manage. Reluctantly, I went ahead with the preparations to ensure a grand funeral to their satisfaction. Then came the day of the funeral. 4 of us got into the car my husband was driving from the in-laws' house. However, as we approached the mountain path, the car suddenly halted. "Look, those wild lilies over there were Dad's favorites. Austin, could you pick some for us?" "Huh? Where exactly?" "Right there in the woods. Quickly go grab some." Though I couldn't see the flowers from inside the car, I thought I might spot them up close, so I stepped out. Just then, Mason had everything thought out and arranged for us. No sooner had Sue spoken than the car sped off. I stood there, completely taken aback, watching it disappear. My name's Austin, and I'm 42. In reality, due to personal reasons, I had dropped out of school and worked at a funeral home until I got married. I didn't dislike the job, but the erratic hours and scarce days off wore me out. It was around that time I met Wyatt, introduced by a friend. Wyatt was 6 years older than me and seemed very dependable. He told me it was okay if I wanted to quit my job, and that led us to get married. In hindsight, it might have been a way for me to escape my situation. Nevertheless, we've been married for 20 years now. Although we haven't had children, I believe we've managed fairly well with my kind-hearted husband. Well, except for the dealings with his family. His family was all about pride, being the main branch, and showing off. Whenever there was a family gathering or Christmas, they'd go all out with a feast to welcome the relatives. And all of that preparation fell on my shoulders. Neither Sue nor Grace, who lives with them, would lift a finger to help. They'd just sit and critique. I told my husband multiple times I didn't want to visit them. At our home, he helps with chores, but at his family's, he feels free of responsibilities, so he never refuses to go. On top of that, he'd act all macho only when we're at his family's place, like he's whipped. However, every time we returned home, he'd apologize profusely and try to make it up to me. Eventually, for the sake of our marriage, I decided to endure these visits, but only twice a year. But I never expected they'd dump the entire preparation for Mason's funeral on me. "Look, Austin, you've got to handle all of Dad's funeral." "What are you saying?" "I can help, but it's not all on me." "Why not?" "You worked at a funeral home, right? You know everything about it. We have no clue about funerals. Please handle it." I reluctantly agreed, but that's when the nightmare began. "The funeral home the hospital recommended has a bad reputation. Austin, can you find a better one?" "That funeral venue looked old, didn't it? Change it to a nicer one. White chrysanthemums are so gloomy. Pick something more vibrant." Every decision I made with the funeral director was criticized, forcing me to redo the arrangements repeatedly. In between, I had to contact all the relatives, arrange taxis for the elderly, and handle the return gifts. There was an endless list of tasks. "Austin, I'm hungry. Can you hurry with the food? Anticipate our needs without us having to ask." Instead of grabbing a sandwich from the convenience store, they demanded meals from me. "I'm swamped with funeral preparations." "Wyatt, tell them to sort out their own meals." I finally asked my husband, but with the confidence from being home, he frowned at my request. "But you're the wife, you should handle meals." "Excuse me?" Frustrated by his attitude and lack of support, I served them simple pasta. "Wow, that's lazy." "If you're serving pasta, you should add snacks." "Yeah, Mom's right." Facing their unreasonable demands during Mason's funeral preparations, I realized arguing was a waste. I just did as told. "I hope you're arranging the funeral as we instructed." "The altar and coffin are top of the line." I've finished contacting all the relatives and the return gifts are ready. No issues. There better not be any mistakes. Stop talking down to me, especially when you dump everything on me. After the viewing, my husband's attitude infuriated me, leading to a heated exchange. Mason appreciated me. He even called me before his death, thanking me for putting up with all your unreasonable demands. In my husband's family, only Mason treated me with kindness. Before he passed, he called just for me, saying, "Thank you for all you've done. I'm sorry for the unreasonable demands everyone constantly makes. Anyway, you know funeral preparations better. Just get it done. Is everything financially sound? After all, you've been demanding top-notch everything without checking prices. Just do what you're told. If you keep arguing, we might as well divorce." Taken aback by the sudden mention of divorce, I asked, "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. My mom always said I should have married someone better." "Excuse me?" My cousin, who recently got divorced and came back to the family, is stunningly beautiful. She even won a university beauty contest. Wyatt told me. At the viewing, my aunt kept pestering me about marrying her after divorcing you, Austin. During the post-viewing dinner, while I was swamped serving tea and cleaning up, Wyatt just sat there, sipping beer and chatting with relatives. I couldn't believe that was the topic of their conversation. As I fumed in silence, Wyatt's confidence grew. I kept telling myself to hold on just one more day, until the funeral was over. The next day, we were on our way to the funeral in a car driven by my husband. But, as we reached the mountain path, Sue demanded I pick lilies for Mason, and they left me stranded there. Usually, my husband wouldn't pull a stunt like this. But there he was, smirking at me from the speeding car. He probably had that beautiful cousin he mentioned yesterday on his mind. At this point, whatever. I've done all I could for the funeral. The funeral service will handle the rest. Although being left was quite shocking, there was a slight relief in knowing I didn't have to oblige to the family's every whim anymore. My real issue now? How to navigate this mountain path in my funeral attire and heels. How am I supposed to make my way through this? Exasperated, I sat down by the road. That's when a car stopped in front of me. Hours passed, and the funeral was nearing its end. "Hey, where the hell is Austin?" I received a frantic call from my husband. "What's this about an $800,000 funeral bill? You better get here now." I could hear Sue, her voice almost a shriek, in the background. "Serves you right." I had to stifle my laughter hearing their predictable reaction. "What's going on?" "There's no way we can afford an $800,000 funeral. Wasn't the plan for the gifts from the attendees to cover the funeral costs? The expected money didn't come through. Plus, only half the expected guests showed up. Well, that figures. Gift amounts for funerals in this area range from $30 to $50. For close relatives like parents or siblings, gifts could range from $100 to even $1,000. But knowing how stingy some of our relatives can be, they'd probably give around $30 each. If 100 people each gave $30, that would only total $3,000. Furthermore, many of our relatives are elderly, and a good number of them wouldn't be able to attend the funeral. You should have seen this coming. Why didn't you tell us? I did, several times. But you all insisted on the most expensive options. As my husband was at a loss for words, Sue jumped in. Just get back here now. They planned to charge $300,000 if you were here, but without you, they're saying it's $800,000. What's going on? About that. When Sue told me to find a better funeral home, I was at my wit's end. So, I reached out to the president of the funeral company I used to work at. He introduced me to a funeral home near our family home and, because of his influence, they agreed to do it at a much lower price. I had arranged a special price since I was involved, but since I'm not there, it can't be helped. Well then, you just need to come over now. Please, just do something about it. Well, I could come, but as I talked on the phone, I revealed myself to them. What? You're here? Actually, when I was lost on that mountain road, the car that stopped was driven by the person in charge from the funeral company. We had met several times to discuss plans, and he was quite shocked to see me sitting on the roadside. Once I explained the situation, he kindly drove me to the funeral hall. I wanted to pay my respects to Mason, so I asked him to bring me here. But I didn't want to be around all of you, so I stayed hidden. So, you were here after all. We can reduce the funeral costs now. My husband and Sue were practically dancing with joy. That won't be happening. Why? Because, according to you, I'm not a part of the family. Oh, come on. That was just a slip of the tongue. You're overreacting. You're my wife. I'm not anymore. What do you mean? You said you wanted a divorce, remember? You can go ahead and marry that beautiful, well-educated cousin of yours. Look, Before he could finish, Grace, who had been watching from nearby, lunged at me. Enough of your nonsense! Since you're here, we can get the funeral cost down to $300,000, right? No, I won't. And even if it's reduced, how do you plan on paying? We'll just withdraw it from my dad's bank account. He once mentioned he had about that much. That's not possible. Why not? When someone passes away, their bank accounts are frozen. You can't access the money. I heard if you don't inform the bank, it'll be fine. At Grace's comment, I couldn't help but smirk. Seeing my reaction, my husband panicked. You didn't tell the bank, did you? Of course I did. You told me to handle all the funeral matters, so I took the liberty to inform them as well. So, what do we do now? Or were you planning on covering it all? I wanted to say goodbye to Mason properly, which is why I had myself brought here. But since I didn't want to be around all of you, I stayed hidden. I then pulled out a bank book and showed it to them. The bank book I was holding was given to me by Mason just a bit before he passed away. Mason had apologized for the past rudeness of his family and told me, since they'll probably have you handle all the funeral arrangements, please use this bank book to pay for the funeral expenses. He handed me a bank book with $300,000 in it. That's why I had consulted with the funeral director to ensure the costs would be kept within $300,000. But surely you can't withdraw that money. They argued. Actually, I can. I responded confidently. This account was set up with me as a pre-designated agent. In today's aging society, some banks offer a service where a person other than the account holder, if previously assigned, can withdraw funds. Mason was always so thoughtful, planning even for times he wouldn't be here. I said, "Hand over that bank book." They demanded. I won't. Mason gave clear instructions. If you ever treated me so poorly, I was to take this money as a settlement and divorce. Mason once shared with me, I married into the family, just like you, Austin. I truly understand how you feel. He was brought into Sue's home, who was an only daughter, in order to keep the family legacy. Although the previous generation had squandered most of the family wealth, leaving only the house they lived in, Sue and the relatives would often look down on him and say, "You, as the son-in-law, should just stay quiet." That's why Mason always cared for me. When he gave me the bank book, even knowing he didn't have much time left, he was more concerned about my well-being than his own. But that's Mason's inheritance, right? Daughters-in-law don't have any rights to inherit. Someone retorted. Don't worry. He had left a will with a lawyer, and he told me it's clearly stated in there. I responded. The trio, unaware of my conversations with Mason, were stunned to learn about the existence of a will. Well, the funeral is done, so I'll take my leave. Just a heads up, Sue apparently spent most of Mason's savings. There's hardly anything left. What? Seeing my husband on the verge of collapsing, I decided to twist the knife a bit further. You know, I'm going to divorce you and sue for compensation in the divorce court for the way your family has treated me. If you refuse the divorce, be prepared, I'm willing to go to court. As I turned on my heel to leave, the voices of the three of them echoed behind me, calling out in desperation. Don't say that! Austin, please wait! Austin, I'm so sorry! Please come back! Please don't leave! I retorted. No way. Even if it comes down to $300,000, how are you going to pay it? To cover the $800,000 funeral cost, the family had to sell their home, their sole inheritance. But since it was located in a remote countryside, they struggled to find a buyer. When they finally managed to sell it, the proceeds barely covered their debts, leaving them with nothing. With nowhere left to go, Sue and Grace, having lost their home, reluctantly moved in with my husband. However, living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment, he complained constantly, and my husband even emailed me about the daily struggles. After receiving dozens of emails from him begging let's start over, I reached out to my trusted attorney and ensured there would be no further contact. I finally freed myself from the burdensome in-laws and my spineless husband who was constantly swayed by Sue and Grace. Now, I'm genuinely happy. Reconnecting with the funeral home's president during Mason's funeral arrangements led him to offer me a position, saying, "Would you like to come back?" I began working there again. Having been on the sending side during Mason's funeral, I believe I now understand the feelings of the grieving family better than in my younger, more passionate days. I'm hopeful that I can now offer funeral services that genuinely support and empathize with the bereaved families.